Hey everyone, it's Ardith, and today's video is full of tips and tricks for making multiple cards. For the last number of years, I've been making about 340 Christmas cards that I donate to a couple of churches to give to their congregations. I make about 200 for my parents' church and about 140 for my church. I have a page on my blog and a Pinterest board that has many of my designs from previous years if you're interested. Because I make so many, I like to keep the designs simple, but of course I also want them to be special, so I don't shy away from die cutting or heat embossing. At least not this early in the year. When I'm getting to the end of the year, sometimes the card designs get very simple. To get the most out of the design process, I make about 10 different designs, and I usually make about 30 of each. I find this is a good balance between the efficiency of assembly line processing and the fun of making unique designs. Here's an example of a previous year's card. On the inside is a list of everyone who participated in the program. They paid about $10 to participate, and then everyone in the church gets a card whether they participated or not. It means that people don't have to take the time and money to send cards to all their church friends, and the money raised is used for youth programming in our church. The coordinator of the program simply photocopies the page where people have signed up and inserts it into the card. In this video, I'm also going to keep track of how much time I spent making these 30 cards, so you can see that it really doesn't take a long time to get a lot of cards done when you're using the assembly line process. Before I started filming, I cut 32 navy blue card bases, so I'm about 10 minutes in. I started at about 7:10 on Friday night, and it's 7:20 right now. The first thing I'm going to do is score all the card bases with my Score Buddy and the scoring tool that came with it. I often use colored cardstock for these cards because I have so much of it, and I rarely use it for anything else. One of my best tips for making multiples is to count everything first. So before I start, I count out all the pieces, and then I do whatever I'm doing to them. Especially when I'm die cutting, I find it easy to lose count. So if I've counted them out beforehand, I just do the die cutting or stamping or background making until I run out of pieces to work with, and I know I've got the right number. Next, I'm going to stamp the back with my Masquerade stamp. My self-inking stamp has black ink, and it's really too dark on the navy cardstock, so I used an older one and white ink so that it will show up on the back of the cards. Next, I'm going to fold all the card bases and burnish them with my score tool. Okay, here they all are, and now I'm going to die cut all the white panels for the card fronts. Here's my Gemini Junior cutting plate. Do you see how flat that is? I've been using it for over 4 months now, and I have a really good, really easy tip for keeping it flat and reducing warping. All you have to do is check each time you use it whether you can press down on the center of the plate. If you can, you flip it over and cut into the more concave side. I found this tip on a YouTube video, which I'll link above. This tip was a game changer for me, and even after all the die cutting in this project, my cutting plate ends up pretty flat. Another tip that came from a recent video from Jennifer McGuire is that I have now taped my magnetic shim to the soft plastic shim. This just means I now have 3 pieces in my sandwich rather than 4, and that has also made die cutting easier. Now the next step is to use my Mini Misti to stamp the sentiment. I'm placing an acrylic block on the front of the panel for positioning because I'm going to stamp my background with this block, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first I'm going to stamp all the sentiments. This is a honeybee stamp sentiment, and it says, "Let heaven and nature sing," which I think will go really well with my Catherine Pooler angel. I'm using VersaFine Onyx ink, which is a very dark black and very crisp, and just quickly stamping it down. You may be wondering why I do 32 cards at a time. Because the ratio of one church to the other is 300 to 140, I usually allot 19 to one church and 13 to the other, and I end up making about 11 designs, so that math works for me. I also like to work in multiples of 4, because each piece of cardstock easily cuts into 4 card front panels. So I usually start with 32 card bases, and sometimes along the way things don't work out, and I'll end up with fewer than 32 cards in the end, but I'm usually around 30. And one of the challenges of designing cards like this is I sometimes have to adapt my design as I go. My original idea was to mask an area for the angel before I stamped the background with the acrylic block, so I cut a mask from acetate. My plan was to stamp and emboss the angel in the center of the background after I was done. If I was creating one card, to make this background, I would put ink onto the acrylic block, spritz it, and press it down. But I wanted to be more efficient than that and try to get 4 or 5 backgrounds done at one time. I pulled out my Waffle Flower water media mat and I laid down lines of ink using Catherine Pooler mini ink pads. I used Suede Shoes, Queen for a Day, Flirty Fuchsia, and Fiesta Blue, which eventually I ended up changing to something borrowed. When I had the lines of ink down on the mat, I spritzed quite a bit of water with the Distress Sprayer. And I used temporary adhesive to put down my angel mask, and then I picked up some ink with the block and pressed it down on the white panel. But the dimension of the acetate mask meant that I really couldn't get that background ink close enough to the angel image. So then I tried a Post-it note mask, but the paper got saturated with ink and water, and it created a sticky mess that was difficult to remove. In the end, I adapted my design and I just stamped a solid background. I was much happier with the results, and this made this part of the process much more efficient, but changed the next step. I'm trying to use up as much of the ink as I can, but as I go on, I get less and less variation in the color, and I ended up with much smoother background sky, which is not the look I was going for. In the end, I put down fresh ink about 5 or 6 times. And here's a quick look at all the panels, including the ones that I wasn't very happy with at the beginning when I tried to use the masks. You can see that each one is unique with different color variations, and they're all very pretty. Okay, so it's now 8:39, and I'm going to leave these panels to dry overnight. But so far I've spent about an hour and 20 minutes doing this. Add in about 20 minutes of cleanup after this messy process, and I'll start again tomorrow. Now it's 2:20 the next day, and it's time to die cut my 32 angels. To be efficient, I cut my white cardstock to fit exactly on my Gemini Junior cutting plate, and then tried to fit as many angels on there as I could. Now I'm die cutting before I stamp because I plan to heat emboss, and I don't want to flatten the heat embossing by running it through the die cutting machine. It turns out I can get 6 angels out of each sheet, so I'll do 5 sheets, and then I'll do 2 angels in a slightly different way that will help immensely with the stamping and heat embossing. And of course, I'm making sure that I'm cutting on the correct side of my cutting plate each time to keep it as flat as possible. So here are my 30 angels, and for the last 2, what I'm going to do is create a template for stamping. The way I'll do that is I'll actually stamp it with Gina K Whisper ink, and then turn the panel and stamp it again. Then I'll use the die to cut them out, and that will allow me to easily stamp on 2 of the angel die cuts at a time before heat embossing. I'm not sure at this point whether my template will last through all 32 of these angels or not, but watch and you'll see. I put some repositionable tape behind the holes in my template, and then I put my template into my Mini Misti. Then I place 2 angels into place, and I stamp them with my Wow embossing ink. Once I have the 2 of them stamped, I pour sparkling gold embossing powder over top. This is also from Wow Embossing. I tap off the excess, and I put it into my foil-lined shoebox lid, and I heat it with my heat gun until the powder is all melted. Once it's melted, I let it cool while I pour my embossing powder back into the bottle, and then I start the whole process over again. I did this 16 times, and after a while, you find that you really get into a groove, and you get very quick and efficient. When I was done, I had 32 perfectly embossed and stamped angels. And you can see that my template is turning brown because it's slowly burning from all that heat. But it's okay, it just goes into the garbage when I'm finished. It's now 10 to 3, and I'm going to take a little break to clean up the embossing powder. Okay, I'm back. Now I'm using tape adhesive to adhere the white panels to the navy blue card bases. I used quite a lot of tape because they're warped, although they will flatten out over time. And since they're not going out until December, I'm not worried about that. I do check that the stamping on the back of the card is in the correct place before I put them together, and I used my box of acrylic blocks to keep some weight on them to hopefully help flatten them out. As I'm working through, there's a couple that I decide not to use. It usually ends up being the first ones I did, as it was in this case. This one is very warped, plus that blue Post-it mask didn't fully come off. And as I went through the angels, there were 2 that weren't embossed very nicely, so that's why I ended up with 30 cards. My next step is to put the pieces of foam tape on the back of each angel, and what I do is basically find a shape and size and then cut a lot of the same. I do all their wings, and then I go back and do all their bodies by finding another shape and size that I can easily cut. I keep my foam tape spooled around the post of my Archon mount, and I find this really convenient for just pulling off as much as I need. And now we're ready to adhere the angels to the cards, and it's 3:15. At this point, I'm just removing the release paper, positioning the angel in the center of the sky, and pressing it down, and this is the final step. Here they all are in a big stack, and you can see now I'm going through and choosing the ones that I like the best for my photos. You can see they all look fine. Some of them are better than others, or at least I like them better than others. And you can also see the ones I had trouble with at the beginning, and in the end I got 30 usable cards out of the 32 I started with. And it's now 3:25. So an hour and a half last night, just over an hour today, let's add half an hour for cleanup time, and that's 3 hours to make 30 cards. The very last thing that I do is I start a list of all the church cards I'm making this year, so I can keep track of how many I've made and how many I have left to go. My plan for this year is to make one set of 30-ish cards each month with a video showing the design of the cards. In future months, I probably won't show all the details of the multiples, but mostly focus on the design of the card for that month. I hope you enjoyed this video. Making multiple cards takes patience, but there are lots of little ways that you can make it easier and more efficient for yourself. Product links are below and also on my blog. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.